Hi everyone, hope you guys are having an amazing day. It's Stephanie again, and by now I'm pretty sure you've seen my Married at First Sight Season 6 review videos, but if you haven't, go check it out. It's an exciting show about modern day arranged marriages, where for the first time they meet at the altar and we get to watch them throughout this process. So every week I do a review video on what I think on each couple and offer tips on ways to improve, and most importantly relationships, because I love relationships and I think relationships are the foundation of human connection. So with that being said, of course every week I get a lot of questions. I love to engage with people and talk about different relationship tips and offer advice. So I got a question about preparing for marriage. So a lot of the time I'll talk about ways that each person could have prepared for marriage before they got into this union, and kind of transition it to the ways that we can prepare for marriage moving forward in our own personal lives. So one of the questions that I repeatedly get is, what does preparing for marriage look like? How do we prepare for marriage before we're married? And I just wanted to do a quick video on just some things that came to mind for me. These are just tips that I literally jotted down and thought would just be great to share with you all about ways to prep for marriage. No particular order, but they are important, and there are many more. So these are just a few, and I kind of just want to throw them out. And we'll start with tip number one. So why do you want to be married? Now, a lot of times we see people say, oh, I want companionship, or, I want to wake up next to someone and I want to just spend my life with someone. And although those things are beautiful and they're part of marriage, they don't necessarily embody or encompass the entire idea of marriage. Marriage is so much more than that. And oftentimes it's not necessarily always the most positive things. With the positive comes the negative. With the things that are so great comes the things that you struggle with. So I would urge you to really think about what you want out of marriage. What does marriage look like for you? What's your idea of marriage? What have you seen that you want to reflect in your own marriage or in the future relationship even, because your relationship will transition to marriage. It's important to kind of not get so caught up in the excitement of marriage. A lot of times people get caught up in the excitement of the wedding. Well, after everybody leaves, after the last toast is made and the last dance is, danced, you're by yourself with that person. It's just you and them. So what really do you want outside of the entire idea of marriage that can transition with you throughout the rest of your life? Do you want a marriage to build a family with someone? Is your idea wanting to build a union with someone and including children in that union? Some people don't look for marriage for that. Do you want marriage to encompass some sort of financial support? Whatever it is, try to figure it out without all the bells and whistles, because a lot of times I think that's what kind of ruins the idea for people when they actually get in it, because they were so hyper focused on all the fun things. It's not going to be difficult to get used to the fun things. What is going to be difficult is getting used to the things that you struggle with. So really just get into the idea of why you want to get married. It is a beautiful thing, so I'm definitely not deterring anyone, but I want people to be realistic about their expectations. So that's number one. Why do you want to get married? Number two, are you ready to come second? And I don't say that in a way where it's like, God, it's never about me, but sometimes it's not about you. And you have to take a pill called get over it. It really doesn't matter that you're not always first. I heard a sermon a very long time ago where it said a good marriage was two servants in love, because they're constantly focusing on serving each other. There will be times that you come first, because yes, in marriage, certain things have to be prioritized, but there will be a lot of times that your needs in that moment may not be priority. Are you okay with that? Are you able to look outside of yourself and maybe make room for someone coming first in your life, or being logical and being smart about what may need to be done that may not serve you in that moment, but serves the both of you? So part of the idea of marriage is getting ready to maybe think about what serves you guys as a unit instead of what just serves you. And it's okay if you're not ready for that. Please be honest with yourselves. That's like a -2 or something on this tip. Be honest with yourself. It's okay if you're not ready yet. Just think about the fact that you're going to have to get ready in that way to make room to allow someone in your life that might have to come first at different times, and you'll come first as well. But if you're feeling like you're in that selfish phase and it's all about you, perfectly fine. I think a lot of people are like that before they have kids. I'm not in a space to give my life to someone just yet, so I'm not going to have kids until I'm ready. The same thing kind of goes with marriage. If you're not ready to incorporate compromise and flexibility, then you might want to take a pause. But if you are, that's good. So that's tip number 2. Number 3, finances. So finances are huge. They're major in relationships. They're major when you're single, but they're definitely major in relationships, because we transition from this place where we're like, my finances is my business. I don't have to discuss it with anyone. It's no one's information. And our society kind of is okay with that. We support that and keeping that to yourself. So marriage in regard to finances is kind of like standing naked, okay? So we're not following the same rules that society tells you, and when you're single, about not letting somebody else know. You kind of have to let that other person know, because you're merging lives together and they need to know what you have and you need to know what they have. You need to start to get comfortable with the idea of that conversation, because the way that you can kind of say, it's not your business right now. You can't really say that when you get married. You have to be able to talk about that stuff, and finances are some of the most stressful and some of the most difficult things to talk about for many reasons. Whether you have it, you have too much. The assumption that having too much isn't a problem is a completely different thing, because it brings about conversations about, wills and trusts and prenups and all these things. So you have to just prepare your mind to kind of have to talk about those things. What I would say in preparing for marriage is to kind of get your finances in order. Does that mean they have to be perfect? No. Does that mean they have to be completely paid off? No. What that means is at least know where you are. Be able to come to the table with your significant other and have a knowledgeable conversation about the space that you're in, so that you can create a plan that will help you achieve whatever goals you guys have together. Don't kind of avoid it, which, a lot of people tend to do. Don't avoid it hoping that, we're living happily ever after and those things don't come up, because they do, even in planning a wedding. So even before you're technically married, in planning a wedding, money is included in that. So you start to learn the dialogue that you have with your significant other about money in planning your wedding. And then your own dialogue is reflected in yourself, because if you find yourself not wanting to talk about it, or if you find yourself spending frivolously, or all of these things, you'll be able to kind of see that in your dynamic with your significant other, because marriage is a mirror. So they'll reflect to you who you really are and what you're really doing. So before you have to kind of answer to someone or have a conversation that might be uncomfortable, start to figure out where you are, start to come up with your own personal goals and work hard at it, so that when you join with someone, you can kind of figure out how to do things together already with a plan, or already knowing where you are and where you want to go. Okay? So that is that tip. Tip number 4, work on yourself. We're in an age where self-care and self-development is like at our fingertips. I mean, you're watching this video on YouTube. So we're able to access the idea of really living your best life, working on yourself and developing yourself to who you want to be, where you want to be, where you want to go. Do not wait for marriage to do that. Do not, there's a cute little quote, he completes me or she completes me. No, he doesn't. You really have to be aware of the fact that you are bringing yourself into a union, and the completion is based on you. That person doesn't complete you. Whatever baggage you bring in, whatever issues you have unresolved, you're bringing into that relationship. And that person is not going to take those away. If anything, the presence of that person in the day-to-day will heighten who you are. So the areas where you feel like you need to work on, really, really take note of that. And I would say, for example, here's an exercise that you guys can do. I would, take a piece of paper, and on the left-hand side, write all the pros about you, all the great characteristics that you have. On the right side, I would write all of the cons that you have about you. And what I would do is fold that inside out, so that if you fold it on one side, you can see the cons. If we looked at the cons of who you are, would that be a person you'd want to be with? Oh God, that's scary, right? Because we think about all the great qualities that we have that would make us a great mate. We don't think about how those cons can get in the way of being a great mate. If there are some things that are concerning, which there should be, because we all have them, nobody is, free of those things, you probably should just start to work on those things, because the way that you show up in all your relationships is the way you're going to show up in your marriage or your long-term relationship. So really take a look at those cons and see what could be problematic. If we have 5 cons that are really problematic for us, which one do you think would not make for a great marriage? And there are some that are very problematic and would be detrimental. So you want to kind of take note of those things if you're in the space of wanting to prep for marriage, just so that you have a head start. The work never stops though. So it's really important to kind of just be aware of that. But once you get a head start, you're light years ahead of, someone who didn't even think about this, okay? So the next tip is look at your other relationships. What other relationships? Your past relationships, your past romantic relationships. If you have siblings, your relationships with your siblings, the relationships with your parents' relationship. Look at the way that you show up in all of those relationships. Sometimes we tend to think that, in a relationship we'll be a different version of ourselves. Like we'll be, my name's Stephanie, so I can be this way, but when I'm in a relationship, I'm super Steph. Okay, that's a facade. That only lasts so long. That cape is not real. You are going to always refer back to the autopilot of who you are. Subconsciously, you are who you are unless you make changes. And so you will show up that way. So if you find certain problematic things in other relationships, with your siblings, with your parents, with friends, and it doesn't mean that you're a problem. It just means these things are a recurring theme. Chances are they're going to be a recurring theme in your marriage. So take a look at that. A lot of people don't really look at that until, it's too late, meaning the issue has, become something that's major, and now somebody, turns around and says, hey, let's take a look at these things. If you're lucky, somebody says, let's take a look at these things, and you start to turn around and realize that these things are a recurring theme that has been happening for years. So since you're watching this video, get on the front end of that and just take a look at it. And if there aren't major things, that's awesome. But even little tweaks that you can make, if you tend to be someone who, overcommits, you overcommit in friendships, you overcommit with your parents, you overcommit with your siblings, you're gonna overcommit in marriage, which sounds like, oh, that's a great person, but you end up feeling like a doormat. You end up feeling like you're absorbing everyone else's issues. You end up feeling, exhausted and just empty. You don't want to take that, even though it sounds good. Oh, I help other people. You really don't want to take that into a marriage, and that might be the way that you're showing up. So that is just specific to that tip. Just take an inventory of your other relationships and how you're showing up in them. Next tip, get ready for sacrifice, okay? By that, I mean, there's a lot of things that can happen. We can prepare for marriage as much as we can, but the reality is there's just some things on the other side of it, some miscellaneous things that you don't really know. Those vows are really important, in sickness and in health. Those things may come sooner than you think. In our minds, we think, oh, in sickness and in health, or whatever the case may be, we're like, oh, when that happens, I'll be ready. Okay, well, what if it happens within the first year of your marriage? Are you ready for that? Be ready for sacrifice that may come, and it's not to be daunting or scary. But if you're like, oh, I don't want to be bothered with that, and some people are in that space right now, that's okay. But understand that when you get married, you are going to absorb that other person's problems too. When we're dating and our boyfriend or girlfriend has an issue, it's like, oh, I'm so sorry, babe, love you, and you go home. Now, when we're married, your issue is my issue is your issue. If you're not ready for that yet, if you're not ready to maybe sacrifice some things or to really put those vows to test, because they will be, then just take your time and just continue to do you. Continue to work on you, and the time will come where you're ready to kind of transition into that phase. But remember that with all the beautiful things comes that sacrifice. There is a sacrifice for every amazing thing that happens in your life, and marriage is no different. So be ready for sacrifice. The next tip, mommy daddy issues. That is such a biggie, okay? Family dynamics are huge. Where we learn to love, where we learn how to be loved, where we learn what relationships are supposed to look like, stem from what lies inside of the four walls of us growing up. If you have unresolved issues with your parents, deal with them. And I really sincerely mean that. And I don't mean it in a way where, oh, it's easy, just get over it. I mean, like, you will carry your issue with your dad into your relationship, and you will treat your wife like crap, or you'll treat your husband like crap if it's negative, because of that. And vice versa. You have issues with your mom, you'll treat your wife, you'll treat your husband like crap because of it. And the scary thing is, you won't even realize it until you have already made that damage. So take that time, you know, there's no, it doesn't hurt to really take care of these issues beforehand. You know, I always say clean up your side of the street, whether they are receptive to it or not, because a lot of times that assertion and that confrontation is scary, you know, especially with our parents. Like, we're not bred to know how to do that. So that might be a scary idea, but think what lies on the other end of that. You know, a breakthrough lies on the other end of that, where you get to break generational curses with dysfunction that continue to happen over and over. So you want to be aware of, you know, where am I struggling with my parent? And those are huge. To think that your parents, or lack thereof, that dynamic is not going to affect you. Nobody is above that. No one is above that. It will show up over and over until you address it. So if there is someone going through something, I would urge you to kind of handle it. You know, have somebody handle it with you. If you're confident enough to handle it yourself, have that uncomfortable conversation and be okay with whatever the results are, knowing that you took the time to do that. So that's that tip. Pay attention to, you know, kind of like the things going on that you may have with either mom or dad, and handle it. This other tip, I've lost my numbers as far as clearly I've lost my numbers. I can't even remember, but communication is the next tip. You know, a lot of people talk about communication and assume that communication is talking, okay? And the thing is, somebody could be speaking English and somebody can be speaking Spanish, and they're all talking, but they don't understand each other. They're not speaking to each other because they're not able to disseminate information where they can both absorb it. Communication is so much more than just talking. It is tonality, it is body language, it is recognizing your partner's intentions and understanding who they are at the core of who they are, which will give you more patience with them. It is learning to listen without wanting to respond, but listening to be understanding of what they're saying. You may not be in a relationship right now, but part of prep for marriage is practicing good communication in other ways, in other relationships. So this is one of those things that you can practice all around. If you know you have siblings, because that's just always the easiest, we're around our siblings. If you have siblings and your communication with them is poor, it doesn't matter how much you love someone, you're not going to practice quality communication with your significant other. If you don't have good communication with your parents or coworkers, those things will transition to your marriage. So recognize where you need to communicate more effectively. You know, I'll give you an example. I'm a shutdown person, and I've learned in my marriage that that is not really effective. So I have to practice being aware of that communication style and pushing through that. You don't get to kind of just move on, and your marriage, as I said, which is a mirror, will highlight the dysfunction of that. And so if you want to develop yourself, and if you want positive, you know, responses in a positive environment, you will start to make quick changes, and hopefully you get uncomfortable with your dysfunctional communication style, and so you start to make changes quickly. But start practicing those things now. Last tip, spend time with other couples who are in a healthy relationship. Keyword healthy, okay? You can spend time with a bunch of couples, and that's great, but you know, who's really there to support your union, and who's really there to recognize when unhealthy dynamics are happening in your relationship before you get to marriage. Really, this is a biggie, because we assume that the people around us always have our best interests at heart, And most of the time they do. However, they might not always be the best resource. So for me, I always say, in all things, consider the source. You're not going to ask someone who doesn't understand the experience or who cannot really speak life into that situation for their advice. It doesn't matter how close they are. You know, if you have a best friend and they've never had children, you don't ask them about motherhood. You know, take the emotion out of saying, well, that's my best friend and I need to talk to her about it. She doesn't know. You know, same thing for guys. Your best guy friend may not know. He might not be the fruitful person that will carry you into a quality relationship and support what eventually becomes a marriage. So spend time with people who give you a healthy reflection of what a relationship is, so that you don't get bogged down with other people's issues, and so that you know that in the future you can kind of use them as a good support system. And spend time with other singles, because before I was married, I thought I gave very valuable advice to people in relationships, and me and my friends kind of run in the same circles where we are very mature, and we don't, you know, we all know those singles who are kind of like, I wouldn't put up with that, don't deal with that, you know, move on, let's go out, let's do all these things. Those aren't fun friends. They're not necessarily the best in terms of like what it takes to maintain a relationship. So just pick and choose the best support system for yourself and be aware of that. Don't get so caught up in the emotion of what, you know, your mom should say, or your sister should say, or your best friend should say, or your cousin should say. Even if they're really close to you, you have to be mindful of the resource. The resource may not be the right resource for you, and it all depends on your goal. I always say you will find what you're looking for. So if you're looking for where relationships don't work, you will find people to help justify that for you and help kind of mimic that conditioning of relationships don't work. If you are looking for relationships that work, you will attract people who will speak life into the idea of relationships long before you're married, and will continue to be a support system throughout. So that's it. I've gone on long enough. I'm sure there are plenty of other tips. I would love to hear what your tips are, but that's it for now. I hope you guys really enjoyed it. If you have any other questions, please let me know, and we'll talk to you soon. Have a great afternoon.